We are live. This is last podcast. As always, my name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined once again by my dude, Mr. Matt Russell. We're at week 17, which normally would, be the end of the regular season, but we're into this new wave here of 18 weeks of the regular season. And I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, I feel okay. Things are still going well. Things are going all right. I feel good. I feel all right so far. How are you doing as we have put Christmas in the rear view?
Yeah.
Week 17 is ahead of us. How are you doing, my dude?
Yeah, Christmas is a weird scene. I got the phone balancing on my lap in the middle of sort of Christmas gifts and at the in-laws and whatnot, and sort of, half paying attention to everything that's kind of going on, while also like sweating Gardner Minshew pass completions, et cetera, et cetera. Week 17, man, week 17, what's the phrase? Same as the old, version or whatever. Week 17 is the same as it always has been, right? Yes, there's another week after this, and we're going to get this is going to be actually a really fun episode, because we're going to be talking not just about this week's games, but also tying stuff into next week's game. There's, spoiler alert, there are going to be games this week that are A, just completely unbettable, but B, the best of the number is already gone. And so I have to sort of pre-apologize to everybody for that. But good news is there's a lot of stuff this week that ties into next week. And so we're going to make some bets for next week this week, because honestly, we just got the news here of the Raiders quarterback tomfoolery. There's just, it's just still a cluster F at this point. Week 17, even though there is a week 18. This is why I stopped doing player props. This is why we stopped doing teaser articles, because, no other time of year would this weirdness be happening.
Yes, and maybe the weirdest of the weird that is happening is that it's week 17 and the record still stands in a pretty good spot. Coming off a 10-6 week last week, bringing the season total to 132, 98, and 10. Again, that's 132, 98, and 10. Heading into week 17, feeling good, feeling great, just trying to keep the good times rolling here on this The On Blast podcast. For people who might not be familiar with what we do here, I'll come out, I'll make a pick, I'll pick one side or the other, depending on what the line is. And my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, comes through with the information and education that you need on where the line is, where it was, and where it could be going heading into game time. And where can that be more important than heading into these crazy weeks, because there's going to be so much line movement. So buyer beware in terms of when you're listening to this and checking the lines and all that. But it's why it's super important to make sure you follow us on social media and like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts, and also just understand the context of how we're talking about these games. We're talking about it based on where the line is now as we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. But let's start with what's going to go down on Thursday night football. We got the Dallas Cowboys as 11-point favorites in Tennessee taking on the Titans. This seems like a lot of points, but when I look at the Titans and I'm thinking, wait a second, they have lost, 5 in a row,
Sure.
Including a game to the Houston Texans, a team that I don't really care about their record other than against the spread, but to lose outright to the Texans might be a sign of things to come here. But it's a short week for the Cowboys. Cowboys coming off a massive win versus the Eagles. I don't really want to be laying 11 points on the road. I really don't. But this is the thing where I'm like, can the Titans even score 11 points? That's kind of where I'm standing here. So give me the Cowboys. I'll lay the 11 points and not really put too much into this game.
Right. So this is going to be the sort of jumping off point for everything that we talk about the rest of the week or rest of this podcast with regards to this week and next, right? Because everything is set up either by last week or this week for next week. And so I made a mistake. We're going to get into some of the ones that I made good bets on, but I made a mistake here by not betting the Cowboys when this was -5 last week, and -6 going into the week, and then, reopened pretty close to that, because the reality is this is not a real football game. This is essentially an exhibition game, because the Titans season comes down to next week. against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Nothing that happens in this game matters to the Tennessee Titans, right? Whether they could lose this game by 100 points. If they beat Jacksonville next week, they make the playoffs. They could win this game by 100 points. If they lose to Jacksonville next week, they will not make the playoffs. So why would we ever see Derrick Henry, for example, in this game? Why would any of the injured Titans, we talked last week about how, liking the Titans as the number crept down to -4, -3.5. And listen, they were up 4 points in the fourth quarter. And by the way, the only Texans touchdown at that point was an offensive fumble recovery, i.e., I believe it was Rex Burkhead was not going to get into the end zone, fumbled it, and either he fumbled it or he recovered the fumble. But the point is not like they actually crossed the goal line in a traditional way, up until the fact that the Titans couldn't score, as you mentioned, and kept the Texans in that game. So the problem is, when we talk about this on Wednesdays, we don't get the injury report to find out that essentially the Titans didn't have anybody available to them, especially, particularly defensively or on the offensive line. So again, why would they, suit up any of those guys for this week? And so now you've seen this line go from 5 to 6 to 7, 8, up to 10. And then today on Wednesday, we're now looking at 11. And honestly, I think there's some juice now on the -11. So we might be headed to 11.5. Which automatically, when we're talking about the NFL and a team on the road, you automatically red flag that something's up here with regards to this game. So, you're right. Are you dying to lay points now with the Cowboys, knowing that you could have gotten a better number even just a couple of days ago? No, of course not. But you're also probably going to be sitting there looking at Malik Willis trying to throw the ball to, Racy McMath and handing the ball off to Hassan Haskins or whatever, whatever these random guys are. And so I don't have a bet for this game. I have bets within the context of props. We're grabbing a little, Tony Pollard touchdown. Sure. We're going to grab some over on tight end, Dalton. And so but there's obviously not anything to bet when it comes to this game. That being said, right, it makes it more likely that the Cowboys are going to win this game. And as we go through the rest of these games, there are certain games this week that trigger other things to happen throughout the season, right? And so as we'll talk about them here, the Cowboys sort of being guaranteed, if you will, to win this game is one of them, because it's going to make a lot of these other games more important. And that's the fun part about week 17. As much as there's a lot of kind of BS going on with some of these games, the ones that matter really matter and are really interesting, obviously, as we get down to, I think two playoff spots available in each conference that are not quite spoken for, or I think maybe it's just one in the AFC. But so when it comes to Dallas, they're locked in on the 5 seed. So, they don't need this game necessarily, but, having beat the Eagles, they think they can catch them for the NFC East.
Yeah, so let's keep things rolling here and moving towards some games there's a lot of juice going on, a lot of spice going on. We'll start with the Dolphins at the Patriots. Patriots at home, favored by 3 points. Tua is in concussion protocol. Stop me if you've heard that before. And it's looking like Teddy Bridgewater, Teddy Two Gloves, will be in the lineup. And if you followed this pod at any point over the last few years, you know that we love taking Teddy Two Gloves as underdogs here. And this will be a very interesting game for sure. I'm interested to see which side you're on. I'll be riding with Teddy Two Gloves plus the 3 points. And I want to see where this line actually ends up as we get closer to the game. But give me Teddy Two Gloves as an underdog. I'm on Miami plus the points.
Yeah, and they made it official. Sort of Mike McDaniel kind of admitted that, it's going to be Teddy this week. Not a huge surprise to anybody, because obviously what matters most, as you'll hear everybody say, even if they're kind of gritting their teeth underneath it, is that he is sort of protected, right? Mm-hmm. And who knows if we ever see him again this season, or honestly at this point, when you're talking about brain injuries, the rest of his career is going to be affected by this, potentially, especially if the Dolphins don't make the playoffs, because there's some, murmurings, Miami, they were up to stuff last season trying to get Tom Brady and, Sean Payton's out there and all of that type of stuff, right? So who knows what could come of the Dolphins not making the playoffs. I'm on the Patriots. I grabbed the Patriots at -2.5 when it was sort of, we saw the move from this line kind of opening around Pick'em -1.5 for the Dolphins. We saw this flip once it was, sort of admitted that Tua goes into the concussion protocol. Mm-hmm. And so, hopping on that, going well, he's not going to play. And then at what number should it be? Now, I think 3 is probably a fair number. And so I grabbed it to make sure I got the key number there. But the reality is we haven't obviously seen much of Teddy Bridgewater this season, and it hasn't been particularly good. And by the way, Dolphins as a team haven't been particularly good, losing 4 straight games here. So I'm just not there with let's just ride with Teddy because he's an underdog. I get it. We've done this, we played that game before, but that was when he would be 8.5, 10-point underdogs on some crappy, what was it? The Broncos and the Panthers, sort of defensive oriented type teams here. I don't love betting on the Patriots. Again with the Patriots fumbling, this time fumbling the ball inside the 10-yard line after making that comeback. But the Dolphins defense has given it up, over these past few games. And when you don't have the defense, and I don't think you're going to have the offense, and honestly, the type of game plan that others have used to slow down Tua, I imagine Bill Belichick and company will have that sort of ready to go up in New England. So yeah, I'm on the Patriots -2.5 here. Obviously at 3, it's not nearly as valuable, but the Dolphins season is just, I don't want to say it's over, but it's looking pretty overish here. At the very least, maybe they get a game, sort of win to get in game next week against the Jets, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. To me, this is a Patriots or nothing play.
Yeah, totally understand it there. I think the move to 3 for me was just more the reason to jump on this, but I totally see it going either way. Field goal game. I'll sit on 3 points and hope and pray to keep it simple there. We'll keep it moving with the Saints at the Eagles. Eagles at home and favored by 6.5 points. This one, we're looking at another Minshew game. We're thinking that was a spicy game, to say the least, last week against the Dallas Cowboys. And the Saints going to Cleveland, win a tough game, but everyone's still kind of confused over the game plan being run by the Saints in said game in Cleveland. I like the Saints here. I just think the Saints, if they can figure out the team that they actually have, if that makes sense, hey, I get that Sean Payton used to use Taysom Hill way too much, and you don't have to use him way too much. Yeah. You could still use him. Figure that out in weather, especially.
Yeah.
Either way, though, I like the Saints. Give me the 6.5 points. And this one, though, I'm going to ask you, comes down to the line. And is this a Minshew line or is this a Jalen Hurts line?
Well, so let's go back to last week, right? Where, you and I talked about how obviously the line had moved some, sort of 1.5 from the Cowboys. Got as high as 6.5, sort of stabilized at 6, then dipped back down to 4.5. And I think it got down to about 4, right? Which sort of indicated, as you and I had talked about, how maybe the Minshew to Hurts gap isn't necessarily as big as, everyone thinks. Now, if you went and you bet on the Eagles, you had a really good bet for 58.5 minutes in that game, right? That's just a bad beat, right? Let's just not, you can't beat yourself up necessarily about that. They're up 10 points. They're certainly up 3 points when Miles Sanders fumbles the ball. Then even obviously, right, the Eagles still had a chance to win that game with a final drive. And so it wasn't Gardner Minshew. He wasn't the reason they lost the game. And that, I think, is actually kind of the problem for the Eagles for me right now, is that, the defense is what let them down. And that's been the thing that is sort of being a bit of an issue, when they lose games or, come close to losing games, because teams are able to take advantage of, the bad run defense and the way the Commanders were able to take advantage of it. And so, I'm just kind of watching that game, going, okay, first and foremost, how do we adjust the Eagles and where is this line going to kind of fall? Because a Hurts line would be about 7.5 in this game. And a Minshew, prior to playing last week, that line's probably closer to 4.5, 5, something along those lines. But when Minshew plays well, you adjust the Eagles upwards and you tighten that range of their play. And so we saw this get to 7, which I thought was, really sort of weird because why is this 7, which sort of suggested Hurts is going to play in this game? And they haven't announced, one way or another. There is the added element, by the way, that, right, the Eagles have the draft pick of the Saints from their trade last year, their first-round pick. So it behooves the Eagles to beat the Saints, even if they didn't already want to win this game, which, of course, they do because they didn't clinch the division last week. So they're going to go full bore here, and the line was 7, and now it's down to 6.5, which to me tells me, okay, we're leaning a little bit more against Hurts playing and it being Minshew back here again. And then maybe the Saints are finally getting even just like the tiniest bit of credit. Yeah, the game plan to start the game last week was really weird, but they won the game because the Browns had a weirder game plan because they couldn't figure out that throwing the ball with Deshaun Watson wasn't a great idea. And at least the Saints eventually got around to running the ball with both Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara. So I'm with you. I like the Saints here too. There's an added element to this game, and this is where we start getting a little loose when it comes to different things. And if your sportsbook has look-ahead lines available, people kind of beat up on look-ahead lines because they're like, you can't get that much money down. But like the people who are listening to this podcast and the most people out there don't have issues not being able to get enough money down, right? When you're betting 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, whatever, you're not having problems getting limited. You're just a guy who wants to watch the game and have a bet and sort of know who to pick and where the value is and all of that sort of thing. So honestly, go ahead and bet a look-ahead line. There is a certain website out there that rhymes with Schmet, Shmi, Schmixty5, and they have look-ahead lines up there right now. And so you can start kind of playing around with this week's results into next week's results. And so, Shell, if you go and you look at the Week 18 lines that are up at Schmet, Shmi, Schmixty5,
Sorry, what was that?
Schmet, Shmi, Schmixty5. Don't ask me to do that 5 times fast. If you look at it, the Cowboys-Commanders game, for example, the Commanders are 4.5-point favorites right now against the Cowboys. That sound a little bit odd to you, right? The Eagles are only 1.5-point favorites at home to the Giants right now. Does that sound a little bit odd to you? Right? Both those look-ahead lines are on the assumption that the Eagles and Cowboys don't have anything to play for. Well, that assumption's certainly not coming because they think the Cowboys are going to lose on Thursday night to the Titans. That assumption is coming on them thinking the Eagles are going to beat the Saints. And listen, they probably are. But there is a money line, and it's plus 240-ish when it comes to the Saints. Not necessarily dying to bet the money line on the Saints at plus 240. But if you bet the Saints money line and they win, we're already looking ahead to the Eagles, that Eagles game mattering in Week 18. And now the Cowboys game matters. And now you're getting, a plus 175 Cowboys money line and an Eagles at minus 1.5 or a minus 130 money line. So instead of just betting the Saints money line for a little bit, how about we take the Saints money line and parlay it in this tied together parlay with the Saints, with the Eagles next week and with the Cowboys next week as an underdog, because by the time next week rolls around, if the Saints win the game, now again, this isn't some surefire thing, but that 3-game parlay comes out to over 15-1. So we're not talking about plus 250 or whatever with the Saints here. We're kind of talking about 15-1 with the Saints. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean the Cowboys are going to win next week or the Eagles are going to win next week, but the Eagles are going to be something more like a full touchdown favorite against the Giants next week. And the Cowboys, even on the road against the Commanders in a game that matters to them, that might not make all that much difference to the Commanders, they're going to be favored. So we're talking about some value here, again, if the Saints win the game. Now, you might be saying to me, like, oh, there's no chance the Saints are going to win the game. I mean, feel free to pay attention to every week in the NFL. There's always a chance one team beats another team, especially in the Saints, where, again, unlike most of these other teams, they're still hanging in there. There are still reasons. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about the rest of the way here is me for like an hour and a half today, just going through the playoff simulator or the regular season simulator on ESPN. And a lot of times the Saints show up as the division champion, depending on the various permutations for this week. So when it comes to this game, I like the Saints, against the spread a little bit. Kind of feels like a game where either the Eagles, like most games, the Eagles win by 20 or the underdog actually has something and is able to take advantage to some of the injuries, by the way, that came from last week's game, right? Lane Johnson out for this game and for the rest of the regular season for the Eagles. A couple of defensive players, Avonte Maddox being one of them, that are potentially out here for an Eagles team that, by the way, lost that game defensively last week. You're going to get better conditions here for the Saints. I imagine, Chris Olave is going to be back. Hopefully Jarvis Landry is going to be back. At least Andy Dalton is going to be able to throw the ball a little bit. They're going to have sort of certainly a more multi-dimensional offense than they did at Cleveland last week. So, yeah, let's throw together that little parlay and see what happens, because if the Saints win, that thing's live at 15-1 with the Eagles next week and the Cowboys next week needing to win their games and being engaged in Week 18 and being heavy favorites in each of their games.
I like it. I like it a lot, my dude. I like it a lot. We move on to the Panthers at the Bucs. Tampa Bay at home, favored by 3 points. And what a Christmas, I don't even know what to call that, performance that was on Christmas night by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we've been here telling you, the Bucs have been a gong show for the last few weeks, despite the fact that somehow Tom Brady keeps pulling out dubs at the end and making their record, keeping them alive here in the pathetic playoff race that is their division. Yeah. But within that division, Carolina Panthers, who've also been playing really well as of late. For that reason, I am on the Panthers. Panthers had a big win last week against the Lions. You've actually enlightened me over the last month or so, just in terms of the spiciness, as I like to call it, of said Panthers, a team that now somehow, some way, have an outside shot. It's super weird what's going on here. But either way, you're talking about giving me points against the Bucs. I'm going to take the points against the Bucs.
Yeah, I mean, hard to sort of argue that. I will say, and again, this is based on the fact that like the Bucs have been rated the way they've been rated. And look at it last week. It's funny, you and I came on the pod. The line was 6.5. You're like, I can't lay 6.5 with the Bucs. Like as we were finishing the podcast, within a day, basically, that line was up to 7.5. And it's just, you're just sitting there going like, how are we going up to 7.5? There was even an 8 at one point touching there. And we talked about how even at 6.5, the play for the Bucs, Tom Brady against Trace McSorley, the play was the tease, right? And I'm tying everything I can possibly find, right? Anything it doesn't like, anything I get my hands on, I'm teasing to the Bucs. And so now I've got all this like Bucs liability, and I just need them to win by 2 points. And I'm watching that game on Christmas night, like just ready to burn the whole thing to the ground. I'm like, I'm not even asking you guys to cover this ridiculous number. And honestly, like if it wasn't for, and a lot of these Bucs games, by the way, like they keep showing up against teams that have like a weird thing going on themselves, where it's hard to sort of definitely fade the Bucs. You know what I mean? Like I would have loved to fade the Bucs, but it's like, yeah, but you are still betting Trace McSorley here. Like if it was Colt McCoy, I could have done it. And obviously Kyler, theoretically could have done it. But like a lot of their games, it's like, yeah, but it is in Germany, or it is like, there's just every game, it seems like there's some sort of issue with the opposing team that would make, talk yourself into betting on the Bucs here. So I say all that to say, like, this line was 7. I grabbed the Panthers +7 long before the game, on Sunday night hit, because obviously these, the lines are sort of popping. That was the weird thing about having these games on Saturday, where a bunch of these games come up on Saturday and a bunch of books open up the lines for Week 17 after Saturday with 4 games still left to go. And so like Carolina was +7. I was like, I honestly don't even really care what happens on Sunday night, because that's a fake game too against the Arizona Cardinals. And sure enough, like it was pretty fake. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to grab this 7. Then it opens 5.5 on Monday morning. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like got a little value there on my +7. And then like nothing really happens other than everybody just kind of looks around and says, give me some Carolina at +5.5, right? This wasn't an injury move by and large. I mean, yeah, there's some, obviously offensive line issues for the Bucs, but that hasn't stopped anybody up until this point. And so everybody's like, yeah, give me some Carolina, give me some Carolina, give me some Carolina. So like by and large, the value has kind of been sucked out of this, because you go, okay, well, where do we need to rate the Buccaneers on, to have, as you would say, like make this line make sense, so to speak, right? So we need to get the Buccaneers obviously down below sort of average, right? They're in the 45 to 47 type range. Everybody might be looking around going like, yeah, that makes total sense to me because this team stinks. And it's why I wouldn't tell you to bet on the Buccaneers by any stretch of the imagination, right? I'm dying for the Panthers to win this game, because we got to get the Bucs out of the playoff picture like as fast as we possibly can. But again, a lot of this stuff, you're going, okay, that +7 doesn't really help me. That +5.5 doesn't really help me. It's 3 right now. Here's what I would say. And this is more obviously having to do with the Carolina Panthers. Next week, Carolina goes to New Orleans. Okay. So if Tampa Bay wins this game, the NFC South is over with, right? Nothing matters anymore. Right. And so Carolina right now is +3 on the look ahead line against the Saints. So I don't know about you, but like I'll take the team who's built to kind of just run and like hit you in the mouth in a game against the Saints, who will obviously have been eliminated because the Bucs will have won the division. I'll take them +3 next week. I'll take them +3 right now, and we'll see what happens. Okay, what if Carolina wins this game? Carolina +3 also sounds really good because now they're playing the Saints, obviously for a division title, as sort of crazy as that sounds next week. So I'll take that as well. Here's the other element to all of this. If the Bucs win, nothing matters next week. They play Atlanta. Right now, the look-ahead line is a pick-em between them and Atlanta next week. Okay, so you with me on this? Yep. So if Tampa wins this game, the game next week is meaningless against Atlanta. Do you think Tom Brady is going anywhere near that football game with a playoff game the following week? No. You're getting Blaine Gabbert in that game. Yeah. And not only are you getting Blaine Gabbert, you're getting Blaine Gabbert with a bad offensive line. You're probably not getting the Mike Evanses of the worlds and the Chris Godwins of the worlds, right? You're like, maybe you're lucky to get a Russell Gage in your life, right? Like it's what's the Keyshawn Vaughn or whatever his name is, the 4th string running back on the Bucs who got some run in that game. So you could put together a Bucs Falcons parlay that pays a lot better than just betting the Bucs or than just betting the Falcons next week. And you're going like, okay, yeah, but I like Carolina in this game. Well, here's the other element. Tampa Bay at Atlanta is a pick-em next week because we don't know if that game is going to matter or not. But if Carolina wins this game around +130 on the money line this week, then you can bet. And if you parlay them with Tampa Bay next week in a must-win game, Tampa Bay isn't going to be pick-em on the road against Atlanta. They're going to be like -3, -3.5, right? The juice, they're going to get juiced up on the point spread once that happens. So you can make both of those parlays right now. Mm-hmm. And one of them pays like, +350. The other one pays like +2 something. And you can make both parlays right now, knowing that no matter what happens this week, you're either going to have the Buccaneers at a plus price, plus whatever price to win a important game against the Falcons, who have already basically like phoned it, packed it in at this point, or you're getting Carolina, obviously you'll have cashed a big, not big, but like a money line price with one leg. And then the next leg is the Buccaneers. You know what I mean? Like, so you're either getting a Blaine Gabbert situation or you're getting a Bucs situation where those, in both cases, like if the line isn't going to be pick 'em next week between Atlanta and Tampa Bay, at which point, when all's said and done, you're going to, realize the math's getting a little heavy here, but like at which point you're going to be able to bet, you're going to be able to take the points in either of those games. So if you bet both of these parlays this week, let me do this again. Tampa Bay this week, right? To win, not to cover, to win, with Atlanta against Tampa Bay next week. And then the other version is Carolina to win on the money line this week, right? With Tampa Bay next week, because that'll mean that it matters for Tampa Bay. So when you split those across, you're going to have about even money no matter what. Now, again, like I said, if Tampa Bay wins, Atlanta's going to be a favorite, and you can take, if you want, you can either just ride it out with the Falcons, or you can take Tampa Bay plus whatever points you're going to get with Blaine Gabbert involved. If Carolina wins, now you can grab the points with Atlanta and try to hit a middle. So there's a lot of sort of fun stuff that you can do at this point, right? So it doesn't really help you as far as Carolina +3 is concerned, but if you play both ways, you don't have to really pay attention to this game. You just sort of wait and see what happens as it pertains to rolling into Week 18.
I got you. Interested to hear your take on this game as we had the Vikings at the Packers. Packers at home, favored by 3.5 points. And I'll be the first one to rag on Minnesota for being frauds, and I can't wait to fade them in the playoffs. All that is cool. more than a field goal underdog to the Packers, this throws me off. I remember the whole thing a couple weeks ago against the Lions. The Lions were home favorites against Minnesota. Yeah. I get that. I understand that. And I would have been the sucker taking the Vikings, except for the fact that it was under a field goal. And I know how the game actually turned out, and that little difference didn't matter. I get that. Yeah. But I'm sticking to that same principle here in the sense that now that it's over a field goal, I feel like I got to take the Vikings. I'm a sucker here. I'm taking the Vikings at the plus 3.5.
Yeah, I mean, there has been money coming in on the plus 3.5, so that now like 3 is kind of more of a prominent line, but that's juiced towards Green Bay. So the number is really kind of about 3.25, right? So to get the plus 3.5, you're going to have to pay a little juice for that, right? Which is obviously, different. So, if your pool at home, a lot of the lines kind of get set on Monday and they'll have sort of stale lines and you're getting a plus 3.5. Like, I can understand how that would be the case, but like, regardless of whether we're talking about just that Lions game or every game they've played since, what is telling you that the Vikings are any good? You know what I mean? Being down 33 points to the Colts, like, yeah, they came back, and I suppose you could make that argument, but like, no. And like last week, like, they get the lead. Again, I was on the stupid Vikings last week because I'm like, well, I'm a moron apparently. And they take 7 point lead, and you're like,
with like 2 minutes left.
But yeah, okay, but like the defense can't stop Daniel Jones and the Giants, so like can't do it against Daniel Jones, like can't do it against Matt Ryan, like can't do it against Jared Goff, like when are they supposed to do it? So like it's funny because in a lot of cases this season, I guess it's been 3 straight since they have covered, right? But like early in the season, like the Vikings were covering anyway, despite everybody kind of going like, yeah, their defense is bad. The offense is not efficient by any metric on the planet. And, the point differential is like historically bad for how good their record is. And they're 11-0 in 1-score games. Like, I'm sorry, like 11-0 is not sustainable. We've talked about it before. We asked them to flip their record in 1-score games from last year, from like, whatever that was. I think they were like 4-7. Like, we just asked them to go 7-4 and you'll be in the playoffs. And like, they did that. But like, this team is just lucky as hell, man. Like, they are just lucky as hell. And like, I don't think the Packers are really any good either. I got the Packers minus 2.5. Again, that doesn't really help anybody out there, so that's not all that fun. There isn't anything as far as like the kind of look ahead line, like what can we kind of play around with. Obviously, everybody's kind of hoping for a Detroit Green Bay kind of like win in you're in type of game. That's kind of thematic for week 18, right? What does the NFL want? If you want to get into conspiracy theories, what does the NFL want? They want win in you're in type matchups. They want both teams engaged. They want to be able to throw a couple games on Saturday. They want to throw that Sunday nighter in and be a win in you're in no matter what type of deal. And they want obviously a handful of games to be interesting to take away from some of the, Kansas City versus Vegas type games in our lives, right? The Chargers Broncos game that's not, likely to mean all that much. And so, there's nothing to sort of tie in here other than the idea that like, man, there might be a couple of calls one way or another going the ways of the Packers, going the ways of the Lions. There's a couple other games that we'll talk about here shortly that you might be shaking your head about sort of what goes down, because the NFL is a, kind of a weird type of a deal here with some of the rulings that we've seen over these last few weeks. Again, not saying that's a reason to make a bet. The reason to make a bet on the Packers here is because the Vikings are dreadful. And I'm like, like they have arguably the best player in the league in Justin Jefferson. And it's funny that like, it's impossible. Like anybody ever bets a wide receiver to win the MVP from now until the end of time is just a moron. Because if this wasn't the reason, if this guy wasn't the singular reason that the Vikings win games and should be considered the most valuable player, no one can be. Right, he'll win Offensive Player of the Year, right? Which we've got bets on from before the season. He'll have the most receiving yards. Maybe he'll even break a record. Who knows what happens down the stretch here? But like, yeah, never, ever, ever bet a wide receiver to win MVP, because if Justin Jefferson can't get credit for this Viking season, nobody can.
I got you. And speaking of never, ever, ever, I am never, ever, ever betting on the Colts. Obviously, I'm being facetious here, but in terms of this pick. Colts at the Giants. Giants are 6-point home favorites. And the Colts, I mean, when you're out here still trying to trot out Nick Foles here to like ride it out, see if you can create a little magic here. It's just like, what are we doing? Can we just wrap up this season of Colts football already? Give me the Giants minus the 6 points. I know that it's the Giants and their offense has been very like gross at times here. 6 points. Never want to lay that much with the Giants, but again, I can't ride with the Colts. I'm just not.
It's such a tight walk with the Giants and the idea of like laying points with them, right? Because it has to be like a 20-10 type of a game, right? Like they cannot give up any points here because they're just not going to be able to score that many points, right? And you can score, like we just talked about, you can score on the Vikings. Colts are harder to score on, right? Like the Chargers did not go up and down the field against that Colts team, despite the fact that Nick Foles was getting sacked every second play. And on the other plays, he was throwing interceptions, right? And like even that game was like took a while for the Chargers to kind of like stretch the game out. And that's a team with Justin Herbert slinging the ball all over the place, right? And so like now that this thing, I bet it at -5 early on the week. So I'm with you. But like now that I sort of look at it, it's like, oh God, like that's pretty rough. This line, listen, and thank God we do this on Wednesday instead of like Tuesday morning, because I'd be doing a half hour on how stupid it was that the market had the Colts at -3.5. Like I jumped at the chance to bet it at -4. And the only time I ever get sort of offended by something in the gambling space, the sports betting space, is when a line goes against me and nobody can tell me what the reason is that the line's going against me. Right? Because that's just stupid. And no one could tell me like, oh yeah, -4 is too much for the Chargers. And like the Chargers are getting healthier, like playing better, on both sides of the ball. And people would be like, yeah, Nick Foles, I don't really love it, but, and it's like, if you don't love it, you've probably watched football for the last 5 seasons, or basically since he won the Super Bowl. And you know that Nick Foles is awful. And he's also in a bad situation, right? This isn't Nick Foles like taking over the 49ers, at this point. He's in a bad situation with like, bad running backs, not particularly good wide receivers, an offensive line who hasn't been able to protect all season long, and that poor defense is doing the best they can, but like there's only so much that they can do. They're not exactly loaded with star power. And so the fact that line basically didn't move, the look ahead for that game was -3, it moved to 4 and then got bet. People were like +4 with the Colts. I am totally into that. Like it just never, ever made any sense. That line, that point spread, with that rating of the Colts would suggest that this line should be 2 for the Giants. So now we have to understand that when we're betting on the Giants here, or in this case, sort of, let's be honest, it's a fade of the Colts, that we are kind of giving away kind of a chunk of, of equity in a lot of ways, right? Like we're already going with the big reaction, right? Like we have now burned Nick Foles down to the point where it's gone from -2 to -6. It's not usually how you make profit betting on the NFL when you sort of like go along with it. Obviously, there's sort of an intrinsic element here of like Giants can clinch a playoff spot, and like the Meadowlands, the MetLife Stadium is going to be rocking, and like I kind of buy into that in week 17 and 18, right? Because like those are the weeks where like the finish line is visible, and the crowd is going to be like so hyped. And again, it's Nick Foles, so it's easy to sort of pick on Nick Foles and the idea that like he might get sacked 10 times in this game. He might throw a handful of interceptions here, right? But like
he's trying to throw it up.
Right. And it was like, yeah, the idea that like, oh, Nick Foles is in and now they're going to like throw the long ball. And it's like, Nick Foles isn't good at that. Like he got away with it that 1 year. Again, who knows what he did to sort of, sell his soul for that situation. But like, yeah, man, it's a bad scene. But like this line, honestly, like 6 is a tough one, man. So, not being all that helpful necessarily, but like when this was 5, that indicated a rating of like 25 for the Colts, which, honestly, I think is a touch low. And the Giants at 37, they've kind of lingered around 30s. They're going to make the playoffs as a 37, this season. And that's kind of where they've been all season long. You can bump them up a little bit higher. So, I guess 5 makes sense. 6 is starting to get a little out of control for me. But yeah, I know that doesn't really help anybody once we've kind of seen this market kind of, flush itself out here.
Speaking of said market, we move on to the Browns and the Commanders. What are the market saying about the Commanders being 2-point favorites at home? We talked a little bit earlier about the Browns and their refusal to run the ball last week and opting to throw the ball in like crazy wins last week. Like, just what's going on here? But here we are against the Commandos, and I can't believe I'm doing this, and I'm taking the points and the Cleveland Browns. I hate this a lot, but I'm taking the points here.
Yeah, and you didn't even say the words Carson Wentz at this point, right? And because that's the gentleman who's involved in our lives yet again. And so maybe the reason to take the Browns is literally just one more chance, another chance to fade Carson Wentz. Man, I'd be totally fine with that if that's what you wanted to do. This line opened 2.5. I think everybody was sort of fingers crossed, seeing we might get 3. Oh, if they announce that Wentz is in, maybe that'll push this line to 3. No, none of that happened, because my number for this is literally like a 0.5 point for the Commanders. Obviously, a way better game situation, because as much as we sort of laugh at the Browns and a little bit for the Saints as well, you can't take anything from that game, because that game was played basically on like Mars, right? On just watching that Cleveland, even the field was brown, right? Like somehow they decided, paint the entire field brown to go with the vibe of the Cleveland Browns. And so I'm not going to use that game at all. At least Deshaun Watson was out there running around from like an experiential standpoint. Could he throw against the Commanders? It's certainly possible, right? Like, again, now he's got his 4th game, his 4th week of practice, et cetera, et cetera. And again, Carson Wentz probably going to turn the ball over a few times, right? Because that's what Carson Wentz does. And so whether, I don't think it was because Carson Wentz got announced in that this line went from 2.5 to 2, because honestly, that's just not very big of a move. It really has more to do with the fact that this line never really should have been 2.5 in the first place. And we all just kind of had to take a day to get over the fact that Browns game plan was so dumb, and that Stefanski is just another one of the long line of dumb coaches in the NFL. So yeah, Cleveland very live to win this game, but I think listen, you're getting a point or 2 because the Commanders need to win this game, because they're, obviously in the hunt for the playoffs. And if they win their last 2 games, again, see how it was all tied in, right? Like they can win this game, but they're either going to be 4.5 point favorites, maybe against the Cowboys, maybe even higher if that game doesn't matter. But if it does matter, and if the Saints do win, then all of a sudden, now the Commanders are in tough next week against the Cowboys, right? All of this stuff weirdly sort of hinges on the Saints and Eagles game, which makes that game obviously the most interesting game of the week, with everybody's eyes kind of watching it, even if you're a Commanders fan, a Giants fan, a Cowboys, et cetera, et cetera. Lots happening with that one game, but the Commanders are very live to win, not win the wild card, but like get a wild card and get into the playoffs here. So I think that's why you're getting a couple extra points here, but I have no bet on this game.
I got you. What about the Jags and the Texans? 2 of my favorite teams to bet on against the spread, even though they might not be 2 of the teams that get headlines across the NFL for positive reasons. Jags 4.5 point favorites, primed in the Vegas zone on the road against the Texans. I was about to say in Texas, which is technically still correct, but you know what I mean. Anyways, the Texans played last Thursday night, and the Jags played last Thursday night. Meanwhile, the Texans balled out against the Titans, and by balled out, I mean they won their 2nd game of the season. Was that their Super Bowl? Was that their second half Super Bowl? I don't know. Yeah. But these 2 teams played earlier on this season, and that's where I'm going to kind of ask you where to lean here. I'm laying on the Jags just because I feel like they're just in a prime spot right now. They're seeing the light of a chance here to make the playoffs, and Trevor Lawrence has been playing well, but I still don't feel comfortable laying 4.5 points on the road.
Well, you can feel comfortable in not backing the Texans, right? Like, I know that the last few weeks, like, that has not been necessarily profitable, but and listen, we said the same thing last week, right? That Cowboys game, very strange, but the Cowboys had some excuses for maybe not being super locked in that game. That's when the Texans started their multiple quarterback type situation. Dameon Pierce was still around to be able to score, with the Cowboys, if you will. Then the next week they go to overtime with Kansas City, and nobody watched that game. But if you had watched that game, you'd realize that the Kansas City Chiefs had over 200 more yards than the Houston Texans. And honestly, if the Titans at this point were any sort of a team, they would have walked over the Texans last week. But so the Texans keep sort of walking through the door of opportunity in order to get close to a victory. That being said, if they had any organizational structure or any management whatsoever, there would be somebody there just throwing a lasso or some sort of reins on Lovie Smith and just saying, dude, you cannot win any more games because they are a half game up on the Browns or down on the Browns, depending on how you look at it, the Bears, depending on how you look at it, for the first overall pick. Now, listen, the Bears get the first overall pick. Are they going to take a quarterback? No, that's literally the only position they have handled. But they also might trade the bleep out of that to somebody who wants to get the first overall pick. Now, is there some Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence style first overall pick, in the draft? No, there isn't. So maybe they get away with just being in second last. That being said, the Jaguars, like the Titans. I hate that the Texans and the Titans are so closely named and they play each other twice a year and they're in the same division. Yeah. I'm sure everybody really is bothered by that. The Titan, unlike the Titans, or like the Titans, I should say, they also don't have anything to technically play for in this game and could rest everybody for the game next week. But you'll remember the game that arguably got Doug Peterson fired a few years ago, where they openly tanked against the Commanders, screwing over the Giants, moving up their draft pick, et cetera, et cetera. That has scarred Doug Peterson since he was sort of instructed, if you will, to start your boy Nate Sudfeld. He's already talked about this week, today. He's not tanking any games. We are trying to win every football game here. We got a little momentum going here. We are setting ourselves up, blah, 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 blah. They are going to try in this game. They lost. The Texans' other win this year, other than last week, because I was trying to think about this. I was I was sitting back because I remember them tying the first game. I was like, when did the Texans win a football game? And we actually had them on the money line in the round robin money line parlay at Jacksonville earlier this year. But they got outgained in that game by 200 yards to the Jaguars. Yeah. So it's not like we've seen this matchup and we're like, oh yeah, these two teams are pretty equal or played to a pretty equal standpoint. The Jags dominated that game in the box score and lost the game 10-6. Right? So the Texans games that they are winning here are when teams somehow only score 10 points, right? Or obviously a small amount of points. That's not what the Jaguars are looking to do here, right? The Jags are looking to score. Trevor Lawrence is so much better than he was at the start of the season when that game happened the first time around. And it's not like they didn't gain yards in that first game. They gained yards in that game. The Jags should be able to do whatever they want on offense now that they sort of figured out who their guys are. No more James Robinson. It's all Travis Etienne. We got these wide receivers that Lawrence is more comfortable with. Since they got back from London, right? Much, much better player is Trevor Lawrence. They had to deal with the weather elements and the Jets defense last week. That was no fun. The fun part was going against Zach Wilson. I'm not sure anybody on the Texans, at least from an offensive standpoint, is any better than Zach Wilson. I think the Jags absolutely hammer the Texans, and that if you're buying into the Texans, it's under the sort of misguided concept that the Jags don't need the game and aren't going to try, or that the Texans are somehow good all of a sudden because of these last few weeks. But again, from a yardage standpoint, that just has not been the case here. I think this is sort of a free opportunity here. My numbers make the Jags closer to 6.5. This is, I think we're getting a couple of free points here with the Jags. I think they win this game pretty comfortably, with the Texans getting their one last win. Because again, they should not want to win games here down the stretch, and might run into one next week, by the way.
Yes, agreed. We move on to the Jets, who are 1.5 favorites in Seattle against the Seahawks. what happened to Geno Smith in the Seahawks this season? What a fall from grace. It's almost like the tale of two seasons. There was whispers of people trying to talk us into Geno and MVP race for like a week or two or something. But I mean, Niners fan, yeah, I'm going to keep my Seattle bias out of this. But yeah, we're looking at a short number here between these two teams. And with the short number and all signs pointing to Mike White, I like the Jets defense still. Feel like they can come up big here in Seattle in a game as they're trying to make the playoffs. So give me the Jets and I will lay the 1.5.
Yeah, it's tough because we got pretty high with the Jets rating when Mike White took over, right? We really skedaddled ourselves up close to 50, essentially, as we like to say, right? Like that's even, dead average, right? So we got pretty high up there, but we didn't really get to sort of see it through because he ends up getting hurt. And by the way, of all the things that the NFL media and everybody talks about and this, that, and all the other things, no one talks about Mike White being allowed back in that game against Buffalo as like an indictment about Robert Saleh. Like, what? The guy had to miss the next 2 games, and they decided, from a medical standpoint and a sort of coaching standpoint, that being down, were they 2 touchdowns, 11 points, whatever it was, that they needed to have Mike White in that game. What an insanely stupid coach. What an insanely stupid coaching decision that is. Like, they could have won these last couple of games if they had just not let him. And it's not like he didn't take shots when he came back in. That guy got drilled a couple of times, right?
He did.
And so, they could have won these last couple of games. And, so, listen, Jackson, who knows what happens against Jacksonville in that game. And obviously, I got to think they beat Detroit if Mike White's the quarterback 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So all that is to say, I just struggle getting back to the point where we thought the Jets might be with Mike White as far as from a rating standpoint. So for this number to be, 2, you've got 1.5 there. So it's been around 2, sort of touch 2.5. Thought we might get 3. 3 would have been a bet on contact once it hit 3, but it never did. The rating's getting really high here for the Jets and on the sort of assumption of Mike White, and it's getting really low on the Seahawks. And the Seahawks have had it kind of rough, right? San Francisco and Kansas City back-to-back are kind of a tough deal. Now, you're right about the Jets defense. Like, that's not going to be a picnic either. Here, let's go full conspiracy theory at this point. This is the game that if the Jets win this game, it sets up a Jets-Dolphins win in your in game. Like, if you're Roger Goodell, throw that directly into his veins, right? That is exactly what he wants. A New York team with a winner going, against Miami. Now, the bummer is probably not going to involve Tua, but conceptually, who knows, man? They've done weirder things. Maybe it does involve Tua. Ooh. So I look at this and I go like, oh God, do I want to be betting on the Seahawks knowing that it's been pretty rough for the last little bit and you might have a call or two go against you and that, and you know what I mean? And that sort of thing. So I don't have the Jets favored here necessarily, or like it takes me a while to get there, right? It takes a pretty high rating for the Jets and a pretty low rating for the Seahawks, but it's not enough for me to bet the Seahawks unless it got to 3. And we've already seen the resistance hit at 2.5 or 2. So, maybe it's just try to grab the Jets at -1 for a little extra juice there and just kind of assume that the NFL is going to push this Jets, win to get in game against the Dolphins next week when that game would be around to pick them, especially without Tua. And could get flexed into a Saturday, could be used as the Sunday night game, right? You'll remember in week 18, all the games right now are scheduled for 1:00, on all any sort of platform or whatever. They're not all being played at 1:00, right? Some are going to be played on Saturday, I presume, as they have been over the last few years. And of course, there's going to be one selected for Sunday night. And there's a couple of fun little options here. So, best of luck on this game. Sorry, everybody, I can't really help you here either. But the best I can do is sort of tell you that it behooves the NFL for the Jets to win this game.
Jets, Jets. How about RAMS, Rams on Christmas Day? What? The Rams now, I was going to say had to, but stay in LA to take on the Chargers. The Chargers are 6.5-point favorites. The Battle of LA, we might call it. Both teams coming off wins. The Chargers clinched a playoff spot. The Rams clinched themselves an opportunity to try to talk themselves into Baker Mayfield. Somehow, some way, they put up a 50 burger. I didn't even think that was possible. But anyways, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm riding with Baker and company 2 weeks in a row here as they're getting points. The Rams are in this weird place where like they are trying, right? Like they don't need to lose. They don't have picks to help them. So why not go out here and try to win? Baker's playing for his life, playing for his career. Give me the 6.5 points.
Yeah, and honestly, if you read the tea leaves, right, like maybe this is Sean McVay's last 2 games with the Rams, right? So like he's going nuts with regards to game plans and like proving that he can like make it work with Baker Mayfield, who like, as much as you and I complain about him, the dumber Stefanski looks at every decision and game plan that he sort of comes along with, and the less Matt Rule is employed in the NFL, i.e. getting fired halfway through the season, you start to go, you know what? Like maybe Baker Mayfield with an offensive, like a strong offensive mind, like, I don't know, a Lincoln Riley from back when he was at Oklahoma and winning the Heisman and being the first pick overall, or a Sean McVay, like maybe that actually does work. Because as much as we've been like ripping Russell Wilson, and you're going to say, how do you score 50 points? Well, if Russell Wilson and then eventually Brett Rippon are throwing interceptions to you over and over and over again, like, yeah, you probably rack up 50 points relatively quickly without having to do all that much. But
still
to me,
50.
It's still 50. You're right. But like, there was a lot of defensive scores or near scores. But the impressive stuff is Mayfield being efficient, right? 1 week he's got the playbook down for a 2-minute drill to, listen, it's the Raiders, but still beat a football team. Honestly, against the Packers, I didn't even really hate him all that much. I was on the Packers laying the points, and it was kind of scary for a long time there. And then last week, right, I think he had 4 incompletions the entire game. And so the Chargers on a short week coming home, Monday night game where they clinched their first playoff spot in like 5 years since the Phil Rivers era. Like, and you're not the home team, right? You're almost the road team at this point. Certainly the other team probably feels a little more homey than you do. And by the way, like we're talking about 6.5 points here. This was 8.5 in the look ahead line. So normally I'd be like, oh, there's a little bit of value here. But like, it's because we didn't really think all that much of the Rams, who were, by the way, not favored in that game against the Broncos. And like, we didn't even really put up much of a fuss about it, despite the fact that, eventually Nathaniel Hackett rightfully was going to get canned a couple of days later. So like, bad call on our parts. But you're right, man. Like, I think like the Rams are trying because they don't have a pick. McVay might be trying to do one last sort of like see what I can do to like get himself a TV contract and then get himself that the Gruden $10 million a year deal when he eventually comes out of retirement or coaching retirement, if you will. This is all assuming he's not coming back to the Rams. Honestly, why would you come back to the Rams? Because you could sign Baker Mayfield in the offseason, but like, is that enough to bring you back? I don't know. And obviously Baker Mayfield's got his career to think of. And Cam Akers, by the way, the running back who like was DOA, like he was out of the league mid-season where he was just like getting sat and didn't want to play. All of a sudden he's running up a storm, right? There's a lot of guys playing for stuff out there. And so, like if you're the Chargers and right now you're sort of looking, listen, they'd love to have the 5 seed conceptually because that means you go to Jacksonville instead of Cincinnati, Buffalo, or Kansas City. Like, which one of these is unlike the others, right? And like, maybe that means they still win this game, and then they win, by the way, a game next week against Denver, where in the look-ahead line, they are 2.5-point underdogs to Denver next week.
Yeah.
So the market doesn't seem to believe that the Chargers, that game's going to matter next week against the Chargers.
Yeah.
I don't really even understand what that's about because honestly, if the Chargers win this game, like I'm pretty sure this matters, right? Yeah. And it could be moved to Saturday. So speaking of bets that you might want to make, you might want to grab the Chargers as an underdog against the Broncos next week, But the problem is we kind of like the Rams plus the points. If we like the Rams plus the points, we kind of like them on the money line here. And maybe that's what sends the Chargers down and stuck on the 6th seed here. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of these other point spreads have been built on the idea of the Eagles winning as a 6.5 point favorite and some of these other results being, favorites winning out. That's not really what's happening here with the Chargers and the Broncos, because if the Chargers win, that game's going to matter next week against the Broncos. So Rams plus 6.5 this week, Chargers plus 2.5 are on the money line next week at a plus price, and we'll see where that ends up come Sunday.
Yes, and speaking of games that don't matter or won't matter, or I guess matter to somebody, the Cards at the Falcons. Cardinals are 3.5 point underdogs. I'm on Arizona just because, why are the Falcons favored to cover more than a field goal against anybody? And yes, Mr. McSorley, Mr. Christmas, I'll give him anybody status. They hung around and covered against Tom Brady and the Bucs. So now you're on the road in Atlanta. I know it's a tougher place to play, but I'm going to be honest with you, not spending that much time on this game.
Well, I'm here to tell you, if you might be in on Trace McSorley, beep, 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 breaking news, he's going to be on the sideline because Colt McCoy has got through protocol and he's going to play. And you're bumping your fist because honestly, that's better, right? I would prefer Colt McCoy. Trace McSorley, it's funny, right? These backup young quarterbacks who can run a little bit, they always kind of come in and they're running different plays than, the defense is ready for, and they're taking off. And it's Trace McSorley is pretty scrappy out there. Look at him move. And then the defense realizes that this is a thing. And then they stop that in its tracks because this is the NFL. And by halftime, you should have an adjustment on that, right? We saw that. And you think Saints Rams when
your linebackers are all they run 4.40s.
Yeah. This isn't Trace McSorley at Penn State going up against Maryland or, something like that, right? So, yeah, happy to have Colt McCoy back. Happy to get plus 3.5. I grabbed some 4 earlier this week, thinking that McCoy probably is going to be back. We saw him sort of on the sideline. It's not like he was in a dark room somewhere on Sunday night. So expected him to be back. Expect the line to maybe even get down to 3 here. Another week of Desmond Ridder not being particularly impressive. The Falcons receivers were catching all kinds of passes in that game that you wouldn't normally expect receivers to catch. So I think Ritter's stats looked a lot better than they would normally be if the receivers weren't balling out, particularly Drake London. And by the way, they still didn't really score any points against the Ravens, and the Ravens covered all numbers despite Huntley having 9 completions in that game. So listen, we saw the Cardinals. They were able to run against Tampa Bay, by the way, right? So maybe some James Conner is actually going to have a decent game here. And again, Colt McCoy can get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins. The Cardinals almost beat and probably should have beat the Buccaneers without DeAndre Hopkins having any sort of stamp on that game. Think about that for a second here, right? So Falcons done here after the loss to the Baltimore. Obviously still have to play Desmond Ridder. So trying. Which again, come week 18, if they're going up against a Buccaneers team, not to circle it back here, that isn't trying. I like the Falcons next week against a Blaine Gabbert Bucs, right? They don't have Gronk, who's going to try to get a certain amount of catches to kick in his contract type deal. I'm not going to be laying points with the Falcons here, kind of under any circumstances here with Desmond Ridder.
No, I'm with you. We move on to the Broncos and the Chiefs. Chiefs favored by 13.5 points. And speaking of done, the Broncos head coach, Mr. Hackett, is also done after giving up, as mentioned, a 50 burger on Christmas. And just imagine that, right? NFL, you get to play on Christmas Day. You work so hard and you give up a 50 burger on Christmas. That's in front of your family, friends.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Everybody.
13.5 seems like a lot. And I know I'm laying points on the Chiefs. Hey, time for our favorite game each and every week, right? But it's under 2 TDs. So I'm on the Chiefs and here we go. I'll take that.
The
reaction is amazing.
Well, yeah, because when has that ever really gone all that well? Now, it went pretty well last week, and I said, yeah, I talked you into it. You were all Seahawking. You were out here Seahawking at plus 10. And I was like, 9.5, 10. Then that number, I think, got to 11. So, we were obviously on the right track from a value and sort of closing line value standpoint. This line should be 11. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think you probably understand why that would be, right? Like Broncos, Seahawks, are those teams really all that different? Obviously, the record being what it is and blah, 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 blah. But like we also saw the Broncos cover against the Chiefs like 3 weeks ago. And that was with Russell Wilson. So as much as I wish Russell Wilson also got fired last week, you also have the element of, what are one of the things we always kind of want to back, right? We want to back a team that just got embarrassed. Nobody all season has gotten embarrassed the way that the Broncos got embarrassed, as you mentioned, on Christmas, right? Like, that was worse. You're going to get, I don't know what the ratings look like, but I imagine you're getting more of a rating on Christmas than you are for a Monday night game or a Sunday night game. Or, maybe it depends on the matchup, because I know that was the game I was least interested in. So I go, okay, Broncos embarrassment. If they hated the coach or didn't respect the coach, which I think is the more sort of important thing here. I don't know if he was around long enough to hate him, but he was around long enough for you to be like, I don't think this guy understands anything.
This guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, and he's hiring other people to clock manage and timeouts and all that. He's hiring other people or giving the play calling responsibilities, and it's like just turns into an Office Space situation, right? Where he's just like, and what would you say you do here? And so they fired him, but they also fired a handful of the rest of the staff. But we have seen teams compete with sort of a skeletal staff as it is. And as much as Russell Wilson stinks, like we're not talking about some of these other quarterbacks that are going to play in, we're not talking Trace McSorley here, right? Where you're going to need like a handhold situation. Chiefs obviously still in play for the number 1 seed, different seeding options, all that. So they have something to play for. But as you and I talked about every year, if we're talking about seeding, I don't really care all that much. Is there a reason we haven't seen 14 yet in this game? Because that's what I'd be waiting for to bet the Broncos, right? And if you're not going to give me 14, that sounds like you're just daring me to bet on the Broncos at plus 13.5, because that the line should probably be 11. So, again, just because the line should be 11 and it's 13.5 doesn't mean like, oh, well, it's definitely going to land on 11 or definitely going to land on 10 or anything like that. But like, as much as the Chiefs have handled these teams in the last few weeks, like, again, man, it's not 40-10, right? It isn't that. It's just getting it out, they're stretching it out to 2 scores and just kind of keeping them at arm's length. There's maybe a few more 3 and outs than you'd expect. Amazing touchdown by Mahomes, right? That catches everybody's eye, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee you a cover. So, like I said, we saw this team getting blown out, by the way, at home, come back and feel like they had a chance to win that game late, even though Russell Wilson got absolutely scrambled on a late play there. So to me, this is Broncos or nothing. I'm just kind of playing the wait and see game here to see if I can get 14. I think Nathaniel Hackett being gone is better, it is a good thing. And honestly, not to sort of do the cliche let Russ cook situation, but maybe the less voices in and around Russell Wilson, maybe for the better here. We had guys fighting on the sidelines and stuff, like all of that stuff. Hopefully, it has more to do with Hackett and nobody really respecting him or his authority. And I think maybe some pride kicks in against a division rival, and you get at least maybe a 10-point win for the Chiefs, something along those lines. Because I don't think the Broncos are winning the game.
No, I got you. Speaking of not winning the game, the Raiders, you mentioned the term scrambled earlier, which kind of caught my attention as I thought of how we segue from one game to the next here. And before we started here, you made me aware of some scrambling going on with the Raiders in terms of a move with their offense that has moved this line as, either way, I'm still on the Niners here, whatever they're laying against the Raiders. So give me the Niners with Brock Purdy because, this is a Shanahan bet and not or maybe it's a McDaniels bet.
Yeah.
Right? It's
and
betting
that's
against McDaniels.
and that's fine. So speaking of scrambling, I scrambled to cash out at a loss all of my Raiders +6 bets because this is going to be a really good spot for the Raiders.
Yeah.
At +6 at home. Again, not technically eliminated from the playoffs, right? So like you can sell that conceptually in the locker room. But the problem is Derek Carr is set to become a free agent at the end of this season, or is sort of cuttable based on his contract. And if he gets hurt in any of the last 2 games, the Raiders are stuck with that guaranteed money for Derek Carr. And that's all that's happened here because your guy, Mark Davis, is a cheap bastard. Okay. And he is dying to not, have to spend any more money than he absolutely has to. And he has to look around and see that his team and his decision which by the way, like John Gruden's obviously, that dude, but like he wasn't trying to fire John Gruden last year. He had to fire John Gruden last year. So then he goes and let's go make a big hire here. We'll make a big deal for Davante Adams, pay him a bunch of money. We'll make a big hire. We'll go straight to the Patriots and get Josh McDaniel. We'll ignore the fact that he flunked out the first time around. And what's happened? 17-point lead after 17-point lead going down the drain, losing every game imaginable. Obviously Patriots handing him a game 2 weeks ago. Thanks former team for that one. But even last week losing, Derek Carr throwing basically the game away against the Steelers in a game that the Steelers were honestly, frankly, disappointing. I thought they were going to be much better in that game and they just were not. And so it's pretty clear that Josh McDaniels doesn't know what he's doing and he's going to be getting fired here shortly. And Mark Davis said, all right, I can fire you now if you don't sit Derek Carr, or we can at least sort of work on this relationship. And I don't know that Josh McDaniels necessarily cares whether he gets fired at this point. Yeah, it probably means he doesn't get another head coaching job because there will be literally no more bloom left on that rose. But he signed up for Davante Adams and Derek Carr and like rebuilding this team and an offense that had a lot of weapons, Renfro and Waller and Josh Jacobs. Meanwhile, Josh Jacobs is saying, to the media that he is done with this BS and all of that stuff, right? Like it's a full-on pirate revolt in Raider country. And so I don't think Josh McDaniels would be all that broken up if he gets fired and gets his contract all paid right back to him too, right? So he's probably hoping to get fired. He's probably hoping that this, I don't know if you mentioned it or whatever, but the quarterback for the Raiders this week, the former Patriot, Jarrett Stidham. I don't think the Jarrett Stidham thing is going to be a thing, right? I don't think it's like, we got to see what we need in Jarrett Stidham. We saw enough from Jarrett Stidham in his, when the job was wide open with the Patriots after Tom Brady left and Cam Newton was awful and Brian Hoyer was involved, et cetera, et cetera. We know he stinks, right? Like this isn't a check him out type of situation. Yeah. This is absolutely a cover your ass situation. This is don't have to pay a guy a guaranteed contract when you're going to end up cutting him. And, Derek Carr is going to end up with the Jets or, some other team next year. And Josh McDaniels is going to be sitting there going like, Colts. Or Colts. Yeah, that'd be hilarious if they grabbed another retread quarterback. So funny. So all that is to say, I bailed out. If all you need to know is I bailed out of my +6s from a cash out standpoint, because honestly, at some point here, the Niners are going to have a bit of a dip. Thought that was coming last week. Honestly, think it did. Purdy did not.
Half.
Yeah, Brock Purdy didn't play particularly well in that first half. And, the Commanders lost pretty much every high leverage situation that you could possibly have and still kind of almost backdoored that game. So, okay, win some, you lose some type of a deal here. But kind of thought the Raiders were going to be a little live to win this game. But obviously they didn't think that way. Are we dying? Honestly, I think the only way you play this game is if you're in a pool and the line has already been set at -6. You take the 49ers and you just move on with your life, right? At 9.5, there's no reason to bet this game. There's no teasing it. There's no this, that, or whatever. Just, a game that doesn't need to happen on this weekend.
Yes, indeed. The Bears and the Lions. 6-point favorites at home. This one is a tough one. Poor showing by the Lions last week. They got beat down by the Panthers. Now they're back at home. I feel like 6 is too many points, though. I'm laying the 6 points, but I don't really like it.
Yeah, this feels a lot like the Giants-Colts game, right? But obviously in a little bit of a different way, where it's the Bears who have the offense that could conceptually stick with the Lions. But the Lions look so much more efficient, better, creative, and however you want to put it, offensively when they're at home. It's like amazing. And so you watch them play for 2 weeks on the road where it doesn't look great. Obviously pulled off a win against the Jets on that 4th and inches play that went, 50 yards for what was effectively a game-winning touchdown. And then obviously just get their face kicked in by the Panthers that we were on last week. But I like what Dan Campbell, he comes up to the coach of the Panthers, and he's like, you know what? You kicked our ass. Like, good job. Because he knows he can take that into his locker room and be like, you guys got your ass kicked. That is not what we do here, right? Yeah. And so that's sort of that was the low-level embarrassment of the week last week, right? It wasn't the Christmas time. Imagine that happened in the middle of a Christmas dinner, right? It was in the exact same type situation. So this line moves from, opens at 5, moves up to 6. And what does that sound like? Sounds a lot like the Giants game, right?
Yeah.
I think this could be a lot like Lions-Jags, Lions-Vikings, where they just sort of like pedal to the metal offensively, and teams that have a pretty good offense in Jacksonville and a good quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, who have a relatively decent offense in the Vikings with Kirk Cousins, but more importantly, Justin Jefferson, where they just can't keep up with the Lions. And we get that Lions team back. And now all of a sudden, again, we have that showdown game potentially with the Packers the next week here. Again, line's gotten a little out of hand here with Detroit. Obviously, there's an element of Detroit. This is kind of a fun one. You can parlay the Lions money line this week with the Lions plus 3.5 next week. Because if they win this game, they are going to have the game is going to matter against the Packers next week. And you go, okay, well, all right. So I'm betting the Lions money line. That's not technically value by any means. That's the price that it's being paid for. But what you're doing is you're juicing up that plus 3.5 for next week. Yeah. And there's a possibility, by the way, that if the Packers don't win this week, then that game's going to be meaningless for the Packers and mean something to the Lions, which is going to shift that line towards the Lions, and you're going to be able to play back the other way if you want, and you're going to be able to do a bunch of different stuff. So kind of a fun little gambit there where you have the Detroit money line with Detroit plus 3.5 next week at about plus 160.
I like it. Sunday Night Football. This matchup doesn't really hit the same as it might have a few years ago, but it's still Steelers-Ravens, Sunday Night Football. Time for our favorite game. Ravens are favored by 3. Is this a Huntley line or a Lamar Jackson line? I'm going to guess a Huntley line, but either way, give me the Steelers plus the points here.
Yeah, it's like a Saturday Night Live skit, right? Where they love their like fake game shows. Like, is this a Huntley line? This is a Huntley line. Still no real, as far as I know, any sort of inclination that Lamar is going to come back. I am in a fantasy football final this week with Lamar as my quarterback. It would be nice to have him back, so I'm not running Daniel Jones out there again like I did last week.
I'm over fantasy football.
As well you should be. So yeah, like this is a Huntley line. This actually probably could go to 2.5 and sort of be a Huntley line. The Lamar line would be something closer to 5.5. Whether that's whether it's the Lamar line at 5.5, I like the Steelers. If it's the Huntley line at 3, I like the Steelers. Right? I like the Steelers kind of no matter what. They should have won that game a couple of weeks ago, but Mitch Trubisky threw back-breaking interception after back-breaking interception. I think the Steelers are actually the better team here. And, of course, they have the path with that victory last week to be able to make the playoffs, whereas the Ravens already know they are in the playoffs and don't really have a reason to rush Lamar back. That is until potentially next week. Speaking of the look-ahead lines that we've been talking about, the Ravens are plus 6 right now in the look-ahead line next week against the Bengals. There is kind of no real way where that game doesn't matter to the Ravens. So you're not going to see that line go up. And obviously there's a way in which Lamar comes back. And that line ends up being 3.5, something along those lines, at which point you will be sitting there with a Ravens +6 bet. And you don't have to listen to me say, I have Ravens +6 and when the line's 3, because by the way, I have the Steelers +6 in this game and the line's +3. So I can't really help you from that standpoint. I can tell you that I like the Steelers to win the game outright. And, maybe that leads you to a bet.
Hey, and that's all we're trying to get to here, leading us to a bet. Here we are, Monday Night Football, the final game of the week. And I look at this line. It's Bills, Bengals. This is a big boy matchup. It's basically a pick'em game. Bills, slight favorite at 1 point. This is a great, great game. And I'm going to be honest here. I'm leaning up with the Bengals, and I'm kind of hesitating on it, though. I feel like the way that these two teams match up, the one thing that's been difficult for me to gauge with the Buffalo Bills is their defense. I know it's a way different looking defense when Milano is in compared to when he hasn't been in, and he's been very good with them as of late. But I don't know. Just something with the Bengals when they got their full offense back and cooking with Chase back in there and Joe Burrow just in a big time game. I don't know. Something just has me here on the Bengals, but I'm not confident in it. Should I be?
No, I love the Bills. Love the Bills in this game. This is going to be a contest game for me. This is a game that I've already bet. Bills are available like -108, on the money line in some places. So I've already made that bet. A couple of things here. One, Bengals are getting a ton of credit for winning a lot of games. You're now seeing the tweets. They're 20-3 ATS in their last 23 games. I was like, yeah, it didn't really feel like that for a long time, but like they managed the cover against the Browns a few weeks ago when I guess they were the better team, but not like coverable better team. They managed, they got every break imaginable against the Bucs 2 weeks ago, which admittedly is what the Bucs do. They're going to give you the football. They're going to screw things up. But like if you watched them at up till halftime, you wouldn't be all that psyched about the Bengals. And then they almost blew, and frankly should have blown if the Patriots had any ball security. Honestly, don't really blame Ramondre Stevenson that much because that play should have been blown dead. Sometimes it's forward progress being stopped. Sometimes it's not. That's really annoying. The point is the Patriots could have come back and won from being down 22 points, something along those lines, right? I know comebacks are just kind of what we do now in the NFL, but you'd be looking a lot differently about the Bengals if they had blown that lead and if they had not gotten every sort of bounce possible from the Buccaneers, donated to them by the Buccaneers the previous 2 weeks. And honestly, the couple of weeks before that haven't exactly been incredibly great performances. But where the on-field thing really makes, sort of is the game changer for me here is with La'el Collins, their right tackle, out for the season with an ACL. This is a Bengals offensive line that had has always been the issue. They revamped it at the start of the season. It struggled at the start of the season, but it started to kind of gel a little bit where Burrow wasn't getting sacked 5 times a game. Now, brutally, they lose him for the season with the ACL injury. And the Bills' defensive line, even without Von Miller, is not the defensive line you want to have questions with when it comes to that sort of thing. By the way, right, the secondary for the Bengals has been banged up as well. From a defensive line standpoint, they still got Trey Hendrickson somehow playing with a broken wrist. I don't know what's going on there, how that's happening. I think the Bills are going to be able to score a lot against the Bengals, who, again, banged up secondary, not a team you want to go against. Banged up offensive line, not a team you want to go against here. I think, as weird as it sounds, right, with the Bills playing in Buffalo, that they're some outdoor want it to snow type of team. That's not really what they are. It's going to be unusually warm. It's going to be unseasonably warm this week in basically everywhere. We're getting back what we lost out on. I'm watching you with the card. It's a phone today instead of a mouse. We're getting back the weather that we sort of got beat up with last week, and I think that helps the Bills here because they don't really want to run the football. They'd love to run the football if they could. They're not very good at it particularly. I think this is a big boy game. I think the Bills, in this iteration of the Bills, they get up for the big boy games, and as long as there isn't gale force winds or snow or some of this other stuff, this feels a lot like when they went to Kansas City earlier on in the season and they won on the road. Whereas again, the Bengals won at home against Kansas City. That was kind of a weird game. Travis Kelce's fumbling. Patrick Mahomes wasn't looking pretty, particularly good that game. They have, the Chiefs' number, if you will. We don't have that sort of proof that the Bengals have the number of the Bills, defensively versus offensively type of thing. But we're giving them sort of credit for doing that to other teams. So, we shouldn't be giving the Bengals credit because they've won this type of game before, because it hasn't been against the Bills. So give me the Bills here. I think this is sort of a make your mark type deal for the Bills here going into the postseason as they make a run to try to get this number 1 seed.
I like it. I like it a lot. And that is what we do here on the pod. I make a pick, and the pick gets changed from time to time because of the information given to me by my friend and yours, Mr. Matt Russell. If you want more information and education, as I like to call it, where can the people find you? Because there will be a lot of news to be updated before now and the time of kickoff, my friend.
Yeah, at MRussAuthentic on Twitter, and of course the score, everything I write over there. And we've talked about these sort of gambits, if you will, for week 18. I don't think I'm going to write about these. I think this is podcast only for the people. It might be easier if I did write about them, but we got a lot of bowl stuff. Obviously, college football semifinals coming up on Saturday, and all the big boy bowls, New Year's Six bowls. January 2nd is when the rest of the bowls, Rose Bowl, etc., are happening. So a ton of previews for that. So I don't have a ton of time necessarily to write about the Detroit parlay, for example, or the Saints, Eagles, Cowboys parlay. Or the Tampa, Atlanta, Carolina, NFC South gambit that I talked about earlier on the podcast. But feel free to message me if you have any questions about doing that. But of course, you need access to look-ahead lines in order to make those plays. Talked about Baltimore +6. Last one I hadn't talked about. Steelers money line for Week 18. That game's either going to matter at home against the Browns. That money line is -120 right now against the Browns. That game's either going to matter for a place in the playoffs for the Steelers, or it's not. It might matter for Tomlin and having a winning record. He likes to sort of keep that whole winning, never had a losing record type deal. That might be the thing. I just trust the Steelers to show up at home in Week 18 more than I trust the Browns to show up on the road. I think by the time we get to that game, the Steelers will be 3-point favorites, something along those lines. So grab the money line if you can now there. And we talked about Carolina +3 being a good bet, whether their season's over or not.
I like it, my dude. I like it. And that's just a little glimpse of the information that you can get all week long by following our guy, Mr. Matt Russell. And you can follow me online as well on Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Another reminder, wherever you're listening to the pod, bless it with the like, bless it with the retweet, all that other fun stuff. It's really simple. That's how you support the pod. Don't ask for much. Just clicking a button. Right. And remember, we will do this again throughout the playoffs as we near that time. Big boy season is here in the NFL. I'm gonna be very honest with you. I want to bypass next week. I hate the end of the regular season in terms of trying to bet on the end of the regular season. But
we've already got 6 bets for next week.
I know, but we will be here and we will do it again because that is what we do here on this pod. Like I always say, I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this. This is the On Blast Podcast, NFL Picks Edition, part of the On Blast Podcast Network. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.
Happy New Year, everybody. Stay safe out there.